The blood trickled down Beatrice Ellen's cheek as she stumbled backward against the parlor wall, her father's hand still raised in the air above her. The winter of 1883 had brought more than snow to Sonora, California. It had brought darkness into her home, a place she no longer recognized as sanctuary. Her refusal to marry Winston Crowley, the wealthy mine owner her father had chosen, had unleashed a violence she never imagined possible from the man who once carried her on his shoulders through summer fields. "You ungrateful wretch!" her father spat, his face twisted with rage. And something else, desperation. Crowley's money would save us. Save this house. Save your mother's medical treatments. Save everything we have left. But you, with your romantic notions and stubborn pride, would see us all ruined. Beatrice touched her lip where it had split, tasting copper on her tongue. At 22 years old, she had thought herself grown enough to make her own decisions, to refuse a marriage to a man twice her age, who reeked of whiskey and treated his workers like animals. She had thought wrong. Her father, once a respected businessman in Sonora before the silver strikes dried up and debts mounted like snow against a fence line, had become someone else entirely. Desperation had carved away his kindness, leaving only sharp edges that cut deep. "I will not marry him," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I would rather die." Her father's eyes went cold. "That can be arranged." The words hung in the air like frost, crystallizing into something terrible and real. Beatrice felt her heart hammering against her ribs as her father turned away, his shoulders rigid beneath his frayed jacket. "You will stay in your room until you see sense. No food until you agree. We will see how long your principles sustain you." She fled up the narrow staircase, her boots catching on her skirts, and barricaded herself in the small bedroom that had been hers since childhood. Through the frosted window she could see Sonora's main street below, the wooden buildings dusted with fresh snow. The mine works in the distance like dark scars against the white landscape. This town, nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills, had once felt like home. Now it felt like a prison. 2 days passed in a blur of hunger and cold. Her father had cut off the heat to her room, and she wrapped herself in every blanket she owned, watching her breath form clouds in the air. Her mother, bedridden with consumption on the floor below, could not help her. Beatrice heard her father's heavy footsteps on the stairs several times, heard him pause outside her door, but he never entered. On the third morning she woke to find her window had been nailed shut from the outside. That was when she knew she had to run. The thought terrified her. She had never been more than a few miles from Sonora in her entire life. The winter of 1883 was brutal, with snow falling almost daily and temperatures that could kill an unprepared traveler in hours. But staying meant either marrying Winston Crowley or dying at her father's hand. She no longer doubted he was capable of violence that extreme. His debts had driven him mad. She waited until nightfall, stuffing her carpet bag with whatever warm clothing she could find, the few dollars she had saved from sewing work, and a miniature portrait of her mother from healthier days. The house was quiet except for her mother's labored breathing and her father's snoring from his study, where he had taken to sleeping among his account books and empty bottles. The window would not open, but the door, she discovered, had a loose hinge. Working carefully with a letter opener, she managed to lift the pins free. The door came away silently, and she crept down the servants' staircase, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire household. The kitchen door opened with only the slightest creak, and then she was outside, the winter air hitting her like a physical blow. Snow fell in thick curtains obscuring the street. Beatrice pulled her wool cloak tighter and started walking, having no destination except away. Her boots crunched through fresh powder as she made her way toward the edge of town, past dark houses and shuttered businesses. The cold seeped through her layers almost immediately, and she knew with grim certainty that she would not survive the night outside. She was passing the livery stable when she heard horses stamping and a low voice speaking to them. Light spilled from the partially open door. warm and golden. Desperation overrode caution, and she pushed inside. The man turning to look at her was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of coffee. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and leather gloves, and he had been in the process of saddling a large roan mare. His expression shifted from surprise to concern as he took in her bruised face and desperate appearance. "Please," Beatrice said before he could speak. "Please, I need help." Lucas Kane had been a cowboy for most of his 26 years, drifting from ranch to ranch across California and Nevada, working cattle drives and breaking horses. He had arrived in Sonora 3 months earlier, hired by the Chambers Ranch outside town to manage their winter stock. He knew trouble when he saw it, and the young woman standing in the livery doorway, snow melting in her dark hair and fear written across her delicate features, was clearly in the worst kind of trouble. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and calm, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "My father," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "He wants me to marry a man I despise, and when I refused, he—" She touched her split lip. "I cannot stay here. He will kill me or force me into that marriage, and I cannot endure either." Lucas studied her for a long moment. He had seen his share of hard men and broken women in his travels, and he recognized truth when he heard it. The bruises on her face were fresh, the terror in her eyes genuine. He also knew that getting involved in family disputes was a good way to end up shot or worse. But there was something about her standing there shivering in inadequate clothing with snow melting on her shoulders that made it impossible to turn away. "Where do you need to go?" he asked. "Anywhere," she said. "I have an aunt in San Francisco, but I do not know if she would take me in. We have not spoken in years. I just need to get away from Sonora." Lucas considered. San Francisco was over 150 miles west, through mountain passes that would be treacherous in this weather. But staying in Sonora with an abusive father and an unwanted suitor was clearly not an option for her. He made his decision quickly, the way he made all important decisions, trusting his gut. "I am heading to Sacramento to deliver some papers for my boss," he said. "From there, you could catch a stage to San Francisco. If you are willing to ride through the night in this snow, I will take you." Relief flooded her face so completely that she looked like she might weep. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I can pay you a little, not much, but—" "Keep your money," he said. "But we need to leave now before anyone sees you. Can you ride?" "Yes," she said. Though her voice was uncertain, he nodded and moved to saddle a second horse, a sturdy bay gelding that could handle rough terrain. As he worked, he asked, "Well, what is your name?" "Beatrice Ellen," she said, "but everyone calls me Bee." "Lucas Kane," he replied, "but everyone calls me Luke." He helped her mount, noticing how she winced as she settled into the saddle and wondered what other injuries she was hiding beneath her cloak. Anger stirred in his chest, anger at a father who would hurt his own daughter, at a system that gave men such power over women's lives. But he pushed the anger aside and focused on the practical matter at hand, getting them both out of Sonora before anyone realized she was gone. They rode out of town at a steady pace, not fast enough to attract attention, but quick enough to put distance between Beatrice and her father's house. The snow fell heavier now, and visibility dropped to mere yards. Lucas led them northeast, toward the mountain pass that would take them down to the Sacramento Valley. It was a brutal ride in good weather, potentially deadly in a winter storm. But it was also the fastest route, and speed was essential. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Beatrice focused all her energy on staying in the saddle and keeping her teeth from chattering. She had ridden before, but never in conditions like this, never with her body already aching from cold and fear. Lucas glanced back frequently, checking on her, adjusting their pace when he saw her struggling. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the storm intensified. Wind howled through the pines, sending snow swirling in blinding sheets. The temperature dropped further, and Beatrice felt her fingers going numb despite her gloves. She tried to call out to Lucas, to tell him she needed to stop, but her voice was lost in the wind. Lucas must have sensed her distress because he suddenly pulled his mare to a halt and dismounted, trudging back through the snow to her side. "We need shelter," he shouted over the wind. "There is an old mining cabin about a mile ahead if it is still standing. Can you make it?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He reached up and adjusted her cloak, pulling it more securely around her shoulders, and she felt the warmth of his hands even through the thick wool. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a connection fragile as new ice but real. Then he was back on his horse, and they were moving again, pushing through drifts that came up to the horse's knees. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was standing, and the door still hung on its hinges. Lucas helped Beatrice dismount. She practically fell into his arms, her legs too stiff to hold her, and carried her inside while the horses stamped and snorted in the small lean-to attached to the structure. Inside was dark and smelled of old wood and mouse droppings, but it was out of the wind. Lucas settled Beatrice on the floor against one wall and went back out to tend the horses, bringing in their saddlebags and his bedroll. He worked efficiently, building a small fire in the crude stone fireplace with kindling he had brought and wood from a stack some previous occupant had left behind. As warmth began to fill the small space, Beatrice felt herself shaking harder, her body finally reacting to the cold and trauma of the past few hours. Lucas knelt beside her, his face concerned in the flickering firelight. "Let me see your hands," he said gently. She held them out, and he carefully removed her wet gloves, examining her fingers for signs of frostbite. His hands were warm and calloused, strong but gentle, as he rubbed, feeling back into her frozen digits. The intimacy of the gesture made her flush, suddenly aware that she was alone in a remote cabin with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. "I am sorry," she said, her voice rough. "I am sorry to put you in this position. You could get in trouble for helping me." Lucas looked up at her, his dark eyes serious. "Any man who would hurt a woman the way your father hurt you deserves trouble. I do not regret helping you, Beatrice." The way he said her name, soft and careful, made something flutter in her chest. She studied his face in the firelight's strong jaw, straight nose, a small scar above his left eyebrow. He was handsome, she realized, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet competence that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. "Tell me about this man your father wanted you to marry," Lucas said, sitting back and pulling out some dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebag. He offered her some, and she took it gratefully, her stomach cramping with hunger. "Winston Crowley," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He owns the Crowley mine north of town. He is 45 years old, widowed, with a reputation for cruelty. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, fell down the stairs, they said. But everyone knows he beat her. He has money, though, and my father owes him a considerable sum. The marriage was meant to settle the debt." "So he was selling you," Lucas said flatly. "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. "I tried to make him understand that I would not marry such a man, but he said I was being selfish, that my mother's medical care depended on this marriage, that we would lose the house without Crowley's financial support, and then when I still refused, he—" Her hand went to her bruised cheek. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "What about your mother? Will she be all right?" Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. "I do not know. She is very ill, and I hate leaving her. But she told me the last time I was able to see her, she told me to run if I had to. She said she would rather die knowing I was free than live knowing I was trapped in a nightmare marriage." The tears spilled over then, hot against her cold cheeks. Lucas moved closer, and after a moment's hesitation put his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened, then slowly relaxed against him, too exhausted and overwhelmed to maintain propriety. He was warm and solid, and she needed human comfort desperately. "We will get you to Sacramento," he said quietly, "and from there to San Francisco. You will be safe. I do not even know if my aunt will remember me, Beatrice said. I was 12 the last time I saw her. She and my father had a falling out over some inheritance matter. She might turn me away. Then we will figure something else out, Lucas said. But first, we get through this storm. They sat together by the fire as the wind howled outside, sharing the meager food Lucas had brought and talking in low voices. He told her about his life as a cowboy, the places he had been, the ranches he had worked. She told him about growing up in Sonora, about her mother's illness, about her love of reading and her dream of one day owning a bookshop. A bookshop, Lucas said, a smile touching his lips. That suits you. What makes you say that? She asked Hidaye. You have the look of someone who lives partially in stories, he said. The way you talk, the words you choose. I would bet you have read every book in Sonora. She laughed, surprising herself. Not every book, but a great many. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, used to let me borrow as many as I could carry. Did you bring any with you? He asked, nodding at her carpet bag. No, she said regretfully. I did not have room for anything but necessities. I have one, Lucas said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a worn copy of Washington Irving's Tales. It is not much, but it passes the time on long nights. Beatrice took the book, running her fingers over the cracked leather cover. You read? She said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Cowboys can read, you know. My mother taught me before she died. She was a school teacher. I am sorry, Beatrice said quickly. I did not mean to imply. It is all right, he said. Most people assume cowboys are illiterate drifters. Sometimes they are not far wrong. But my mother insisted I get educated, even after my father died and we had nothing. She said knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. She sounds like a wise woman? She was, Lucas said softly. I wish you could have met her. The intimacy of that statement hung between them, and Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. She looked away, focusing on the fire, trying to make sense of the strange feelings stirring inside her. She had known this man for mere hours, yet she felt more connected to him than she ever had to Winston Crowley or any of the young men who had courted her in Sonora. As the night deepened, exhaustion finally overtook fear and cold. Lucas insisted she take his bedroll, and he settled against the opposite wall with just his coat for warmth. Beatrice protested, but he was immovable. You have been through an ordeal, he said. You need proper rest. I have slept in worse conditions, believe me. She wanted to argue further, but her body was already sinking into the bedroll, and within minutes she was asleep. Lucas watched her in the firelight, this unexpected woman who had stumbled into his life. He thought about what she had told him, about her father's violence and Crowley's reputation. He thought about the courage it must have taken for her to run into a winter storm rather than submit to a forced marriage. He thought about the way she felt in his arms, small and vulnerable, but with a core of steel underneath. He was in trouble, he realized. He had been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long, never letting himself get attached. But something about Beatrice Ellen had already worked its way under his skin in the few hours since they met. He told himself it was just protective instinct, the same feeling he got when he saw an animal in distress. But he knew, even as he thought it, that it was more than that. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. Lucas woke stiff and cold. The fire burned down to embers. He rebuilt it carefully, trying not to wake Beatrice, and went outside to check on the horses. They had weathered the night well, and he fed them grain from his saddlebag before scouting the area. The pass ahead was treacherous, deep with snow and icy in places where the wind had scoured the surface. It would be slow going, but passable. He estimated they could reach the lower elevations by nightfall if they started soon and pushed hard. When he returned to the cabin, Beatrice was awake, finger combing her dark hair and trying to make herself presentable. She looked up as he entered, and he saw wariness in her eyes, the reality of her situation settling in with the daylight. How are you feeling? He asked. Sore, she admitted, and scared. What if my father is looking for me? What if he catches us? "We have a good lead on anyone coming from Sonora," Lucas said. "And in this snow, tracking will be near impossible. We just need to keep moving." They shared a quick breakfast of the remaining hardtack and some water Lucas melted from snow, then packed up and saddled the horses. The sun was fully up now, painfully bright against the snow, and Beatrice had to squint against the glare. The ride that day was grueling. The horses struggled through deep drifts, and more than once they had to dismount and lead them through particularly treacherous sections. Beatrice's face was soon windburned, her fingers aching despite her gloves, but she did not complain, and Lucas found himself admiring her toughness. Many women of his acquaintance would have fallen apart under these conditions, but Beatrice just gritted her teeth and kept going. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat. Lucas noticed Beatrice favoring her left side and asked, "Are you hurt?" She hesitated, then nodded. "My ribs. My father kicked me when I fell. It hurts to breathe sometimes." Anger flared in Lucas again, hot and fierce. "Can I look?" She blushed deeply. "That would not be proper." "Propriety matters less than making sure you are not seriously injured," he said gently. "I promise I will only look at your ribs." After a long moment, she nodded and carefully lifted the edge of her shirtwaist. The corset beneath made it hard to see, but Lucas could make out dark purple bruising spreading across her left side. He had seen enough injuries from cattle work and horse accidents to recognize broken ribs when he saw them. "I think at least 2 are cracked," he said quietly. "There's not much we can do except bind them and limit your movement. When we get to Sacramento, we need to find you a doctor." "I cannot afford a doctor," she said. "I can," Lucas said firmly. "Or my boss can. Do not worry about money right now." As he helped her back onto her horse, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her waist, Lucas realized just how deeply involved he was becoming. This was no longer just about helping a woman escape a bad situation. He was starting to care about her, to think about her future, to imagine himself as part of it. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt oddly right. They descended from the pass as afternoon stretched toward evening, the terrain gradually becoming less severe. The snow thinned and patches of brown grass appeared. The temperature rose enough that Beatrice could finally feel her toes again. As they rode through a stand of pines, Lucas suddenly held up his hand for quiet. Beatrice froze, listening. At first she heard nothing but wind in the trees, then faint but unmistakable, the sound of horses behind them. "Someone is coming," Lucas said quietly. "Fast." Fear clutched at Beatrice's throat. "My father?" "Maybe. We need to get off the trail." He led them quickly into denser cover behind a rocky outcropping where they could watch the trail without being seen. They dismounted and waited, Lucas's hand resting on the rifle in his saddle scabbard. 3 riders came into view minutes later, pushing their horses hard through the snow. Beatrice recognized them immediately: Winston Crowley on his black stallion, flanked by 2 of his mine foremen, both large men known for their rough methods. "That is him," she whispered to Lucas. "That is Crowley." Lucas studied the men with a professional eye. They were well armed and looked capable, but they also looked cold and irritable, pushing their horses too hard for the conditions. They passed the outcropping without pausing, intent on the trail ahead. "They think we are still ahead of them," Lucas said once they were out of sight. "We need to double back, take a different route to Sacramento." "Will that not make us lose time?" Beatrice asked. "Yes, but it is better than confronting them directly. 3 armed men against 1 cowboy are not good odds." He saw her frightened expression and added, "I will keep you safe, Beatrice, I promise." They waited another 10 minutes to be sure Crowley and his men were well ahead, then carefully worked their way back down the trail before branching off onto a smaller path Lucas knew. It would add at least half a day to their journey, but it would also take them away from anyone pursuing them. As they rode, Beatrice found herself watching Lucas, the easy way he sat his horse, the confidence with which he navigated the terrain, the constant awareness of their surroundings. She felt safe with him, she realized. Despite everything that had happened, Despite being alone in the wilderness with a man who was essentially a stranger, she trusted him completely. The realization was startling and a little frightening. She had spent years being courted by various men in Sonora, men from good families with respectable positions, and she had never felt for any of them what she was beginning to feel for Lucas Kane. There was an attraction. Yes, she could not deny the flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, the warmth that spread through her when he touched her hand. But it was more than physical attraction. It was recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting to meet him without knowing it. They made camp that night in a small cave Lucas knew about, tucked into a hillside and invisible from the trail. He built another fire and shared his dwindling supplies, apologizing for the meager meal. "I am not complaining," Beatrice said. "You have saved my life. A little hunger is nothing compared to what I escaped." "Tell me more about yourself," Lucas said as they ate. "What is your favorite book?" She smiled. "That is like asking a mother to choose her favorite child. But if I must choose, I would say Jane Eyre. There is something about Jane's strength, her refusal to compromise her principles even when it costs her dearly, that speaks to me." "I have not read it," Lucas admitted, "but I would like to, after hearing you talk about it." "What about you?" she asked. "What is your favorite story from that Washington Irving collection?" "Rip Van Winkle," he said without hesitation. "I like the idea of escaping your problems by sleeping through them, even though I know life does not work that way." "What problems would you want to sleep through?" Beatrice asked, genuinely curious. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I lost someone once," he said finally. "A woman I thought I would marry. She died of cholera during an outbreak in Virginia City. That was 5 years ago, and I've been drifting ever since, not wanting to settle anywhere or get close to anyone. I told myself it was because I liked the freedom of cowboy life, but really I was just afraid of losing someone again." Beatrice's heart ached for him. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was," he said, "but I'm starting to think maybe I have been hiding long enough." He looked at her, his expression intense. "Meeting you has reminded me that life is short and unpredictable. You ran away from safety, from everything familiar, because staying meant surrendering who you are. That takes real courage." "I was terrified," Beatrice said. "I still am." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Lucas said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Beatrice asked the question that had been building in her mind all day. "What happens when we reach Sacramento? Will you just leave me there?" Lucas looked at her for a long moment. "Do you want me to?" "No," she said softly, honestly. "But I understand if you have obligations, places you need to be." "The only obligation I have is delivering some papers for my boss, and that can wait a few days, Guy," Lucas said. "I would like to make sure you are settled before I go anywhere. Make sure your aunt will take you in or help you find other arrangements if she will not." "Thank you," Beatrice said, and impulsively reached out to touch his hand. "For everything. I do not know what would have happened to me if I had not found you in that stable." Lucas turned his hand over, gently clasping hers. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and Beatrice felt electricity run up her arm at the simple touch. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered. He seemed to struggle with the words, then finally said, "I know we have only known each other for 2 days, and I know you are running from one man trying to force you into a relationship. I do not want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable or pressures you. But I need you to know that I have feelings for you, real feelings, and if someday when you are safe and settled and have had time to heal, you might want to see where this," he gestured between them, "could go, I would very much like that." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I have feelings for you too," she said. "I thought I was imagining it, or that it was just gratitude or the intensity of the situation, but no, it is more than that. You are the first man who has ever made me feel seen, truly seen, for who I am rather than what I represent. Lucas smiled, a slow, warm smile that transformed his face. Then we will figure this out together. No rushing, no pressure, just together. Together, Beatrice agreed, and squeezed his hand. They sat that way for a long time, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down. When they finally separated to sleep, Lucas spreading his coat over Beatrice's bedroll to add extra warmth. The air between them felt different, charged with possibility and the promise of something neither of them had dared to hope for. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They rode out early, making good time now that they were on lower terrain and the snow had mostly disappeared. Lucas estimated they would reach Sacramento by late afternoon if they kept up the pace. Around midday, they stopped by a small stream to water the horses and rest. Beatrice was washing her face in the icy water when she heard Lucas call out a warning. She turned to see Winston Crowley and his two foremen emerging from the trees, guns drawn. "Did you really think you could run from me, girl?" Crowley said, his voice dripping with contempt. He was a heavy man, with graying hair and cold eyes that made Beatrice's skin crawl. "Your father is paying me good money to bring you back, and I always collect what I am owed." Lucas stepped between Beatrice and the three men, his hand hovering near his gun. "The lady does not want to go with you. I suggest you turn around and head back to Sonora." Crowley laughed, a harsh sound. "The lady! She is property, boy. Her father signed a contract. She belongs to me, bought and paid for. Now step aside, or I will have my men put you down like the stray dog you are." "Nobody belongs to anybody," Lucas said, his voice deadly calm. "And you are not taking her anywhere." Beatrice saw one of the foremen shifting position, trying to flank them. Fear and anger warred inside her, fear for Lucas's safety, anger that these men would not leave her alone. She was tired of running, tired of being treated like an object to be traded or sold. "Stop," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Mr. Crowley, I will never marry you. Not if you drag me back to Sonora, not if you lock me up, not ever. I would rather die than be your wife. So shoot me if that is what you intend, but stop pretending this is about contracts or money. This is about you wanting something you cannot have." Crowley's face turned purple with rage. "You little—" He never finished the sentence. Lucas drew his gun with practiced speed and fired, kicking up dirt at Crowley's horse's feet. The horse reared, nearly throwing Crowley. The two foremen went for their guns, but Lucas was faster, firing twice more, both shots carefully placed to warn rather than kill. "Next ones will not miss," Lucas said coldly. "Now drop your weapons and ride out, or I will defend myself and the lady properly." For a tense moment, Beatrice thought Crowley would call the bluff. Then one of the foremen said nervously, "Boss, he has got the drop on us, and there is no money worth dying for." Crowley glared at them, at Lucas, and finally at Beatrice. "This is not over. Your father wants you back, and I have a contract." "Your contract is void," Lucas interrupted. "A contract to sell a woman into marriage is illegal in California as of 1850. Check your law books. Now ride out, or I start shooting for real." Crowley looked like he wanted to argue, but the cold determination in Lucas's eyes must have convinced him. With a string of curses, he jerked his horse around and rode off, his foreman following. They watched until the three men disappeared over a ridge. Beatrice found she was shaking. Lucas holstered his gun and immediately turned to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she managed. You could have been killed." "Not likely," Lucas said, though his face was pale beneath his tan. "I grew up shooting. But Crowley is a coward. Cowards back down when someone stands up to them." "Is what you said true?" Beatrice asked, "about the contract being illegal?" Lucas hesitated. "Honestly, I'm not sure, but it sounded convincing, and that is what mattered. We need to get to Sacramento now, though. Crowley might come back with more men, or he might send word ahead. Either way, we are not safe until we get you somewhere he cannot reach you." They mounted quickly and rode hard for the next several hours, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. The landscape changed as they descended, the pine forests giving way to oak groves and grassland. The air grew warmer, and Beatrice could smell the valley earth and growing things, so different from the sharp pine scent of the mountains. Sacramento appeared in the distance as the sun began to set. A sprawling collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets sprawled along the Sacramento River. After the isolation of the past few days, the sight of civilization was both relieving and overwhelming. Lucas led them to a modest boarding house on the edge of town, run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Harriet Vaughn, who asked no questions when Lucas paid for 2 rooms and explained that his sister had been in an accident and needed rest and medical attention. The lie came smoothly, and Beatrice was too exhausted to do anything but follow Mrs. Vaughn up the stairs to a small, clean room with an actual bed. "I will bring up some hot water for washing," Mrs. Vaughn said, "and some supper. You look half frozen, poor dear." When she was gone, Beatrice sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. They had made it. Against all odds, through snow and cold and pursuit, they had made it to Sacramento. She should have felt relieved, but instead she felt oddly empty, as if the adrenaline that had kept her going for days had suddenly drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and uncertainty. A soft knock on the door, and Lucas entered carrying her carpet bag. "How are you holding up?" "I do not know," she said honestly, "and everything feels unreal. 2 days ago I was in my father's house, and now I am here, and I do not know what happens next." Lucas sat beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "We find you a doctor first thing tomorrow. Get your ribs looked at properly. Then we send word to your aunt in San Francisco, see if she will receive you, and we figure out the rest from there." "What about you?" Beatrice asked. "You have your own life, your own obligations." "I told you," Lucas said gently. "I am not going anywhere until I know you are safe and settled, and even then, only if you want me to go." "I do not want you to go," Beatrice said softly. "Is that selfish of me?" "No," Lucas said. "It is not selfish, because I do not want to leave either." They looked at each other, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken possibilities. Slowly, carefully, Lucas reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gentle on her bruised cheek. "I am going to kiss you now," he said quietly, "if that is all right with you." "Yes," Beatrice breathed. "Please." The kiss was soft, tentative at first, both of them aware of her injuries and the newness of this connection between them. But as Beatrice leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, the kiss deepened, becoming something both tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have never felt this way before," Beatrice whispered. "Not with anyone." "Neither have I," Lucas said. "Not even with Sarah, the woman I lost. This is different, stronger, like it was meant to be." A knock on the door interrupted them, and they sprang apart guiltily as Mrs. Vaughn entered with a pitcher of hot water and a tray of food. If she noticed anything amiss, she gave no sign, simply set everything down and left with instructions to call if they needed anything else. Lucas reluctantly stood to leave. "Get some rest. I am just across the hall if you need me." "Lucas," Beatrice said, and he paused at the door. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for protecting me, for caring about me." He smiled, that warm smile that made her heart skip. "It is the easiest thing I have ever done." When he was gone, Beatrice washed and ate, her body going through the motions while her mind spun. She was falling in love with Lucas Kane. The realization should have terrified her. She barely knew him, and her last experience with men had been traumatic. But somehow, being with Lucas felt right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. She fell asleep thinking about his kiss, about the way he looked at her like she was precious, about the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. The next morning, Lucas took her to see a doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Philip Morrison, who examined her ribs and confirmed what Lucas had suspected too were cracked, and she had significant bruising throughout her torso. He bound them tightly and gave her laudanum for the pain, along with strict instructions to rest and avoid strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. "How did this happen, young lady?" Dr. Morrison asked, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Beatrice hesitated, but Lucas said firmly, "Her father beat her when she refused to marry against her will. We are trying to get her somewhere safe." The doctor's expression darkened. "I see. Well, young lady, if you need any testimony or documentation of your injuries for legal purposes, you come to me. I have no tolerance for men who abuse women." "Thank you," Beatrice said gratefully. After leaving the doctor's office, they found a telegraph office and sent a wire to Beatrice's aunt in San Francisco, explaining the situation and asking if Beatrice could come stay with her. Then there was nothing to do but wait for a response. They spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo, staying at the boarding house and venturing out only for meals and short walks. Sacramento in January was cold, but nothing compared to the mountain pass they had crossed. The town was busy with miners and businessmen, with women in fine dresses shopping at mercantiles and children running through the muddy streets. During those days, Beatrice and Lucas talked for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother's death when he was 15, and how he had drifted west working cattle drives. She told him about her childhood in Sonora, about her mother's illness, and the gradual deterioration of her father's character as debts mounted. They were careful about propriety, keeping Mrs. Vaughn satisfied that everything was above board. But there were moments a hand held too long, a look that lingered, a kiss stolen in the hallway when no one was watching, that spoke of the growing passion between them. On the 4th day, a reply came from Beatrice's aunt, Clara Edwards. The telegram was brief but warm. "Come at once. You are always welcome here. We'll expect you on the Friday stage." Beatrice read it 3 times, relief washing over her. She had a place to go, somewhere her father and Winston Crowley could not reach her. She should have been overjoyed. Instead, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. "What is wrong?" Lucas asked, watching her face. "Nothing," she said, then corrected herself. "No, that is not true. I am relieved about my aunt, but I am worried about what happens next, between us." Lucas took her hands in his. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to be with you," Beatrice said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a week, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. Does that sound insane?" "No," Lucas said, his eyes bright. "It sounds exactly like how I feel. Beatrice, I love you. I know I should probably wait longer to say it, court you properly, do all the things a gentleman is supposed to do, but I love you and I want to marry you if you will have me." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Lucas. I think I started falling for you the moment you agreed to help me in that stable." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, uncaring that they were standing in the middle of the boarding house parlor where anyone could see. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should do this properly," Lucas said. "I need to talk to my boss, settle my affairs. You need to get established with your aunt, heal fully from your injuries. But in a few months, if you are still certain—" "I will be certain," Beatrice interrupted. "In a few months, in a year, in 10 years. I am certain now." "Then we will get married," Lucas said, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret running away into that snow." They took the stage to San Francisco 2 days later, the journey much more comfortable than their desperate flight through the mountains. Beatrice's aunt lived in a respectable neighborhood, in a narrow townhouse painted a cheerful yellow. She was waiting on the porch when they arrived, a slender woman in her 50s with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes exactly like Beatrice's mother. "Bea," she said, embracing her niece carefully when she saw the way she moved. "Oh, my dear child, what did that bastard do to you?" Beatrice introduced Lucas, and Clara studied him with sharp eyes before apparently deciding he passed muster. "Come in, both of you. We have much to discuss." Over tea and cake, Beatrice told her aunt everything: her father's violence, Winston Crowley's contract, her escape through the snow, and Lucas's rescue. Clara listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer with each detail. "Your father was always a fool," she said when Beatrice finished, "but I never thought him capable of this. As for Crowley, I know his type bullies who think money gives them the right to whatever they want." She turned to Lucas. "And you, young man, what are your intentions toward my niece?" "I intend to marry her," Lucas said directly, "with your permission and hers. I love her, Mrs. Edwards, and I will spend my life taking care of her." Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. Lord knows Bea deserves someone who will treat her well. But there are practicalities to consider. You are a cowboy, you said. That is hard, uncertain work. How will you support a wife?" "I have been saving my wages for years," Lucas said. "I have enough to buy some land, start a small ranch. It will not be fancy, but it will be ours. And I am a good worker I can always hire on with larger operations when we need extra income." "Where were you thinking of settling?" Clara asked. "I have been looking at land near Grass Valley," Lucas said. "Good grazing, close enough to Sacramento for supply runs, far enough from Sonora that Beatrice will not have to worry about her father or Crowley finding her." Clara nodded approvingly. "That sounds sensible. Well, Bea, it seems you have found yourself a practical man with actual plans. That is more than most girls manage." She turned to Beatrice. "What do you want, child, truly?" "I want to marry Lucas," Beatrice said without hesitation. "I want to build a life with him, away from my father and Crowley and all the darkness of the past few months. I want to be free, Aunt Clara, and with Lucas I finally am." Clara's eyes softened. "Then you have my blessing. But I want you to stay here for at least 2 months, get your strength back, and let Lucas prove his intentions are serious. If after 2 months you both still feel the same way, we will plan a proper wedding." It was a reasonable request, and both Beatrice and Lucas agreed. Lucas returned to Sacramento to fulfill his obligations to his boss and begin the process of purchasing land. He visited San Francisco twice during those 2 months, and each visit confirmed what both of them already knew: their love was real and enduring. Beatrice healed, both physically and emotionally. Her ribs mended, and the bruises faded. She gained weight, her aunt's excellent cooking filling out the gauntness that privation and stress had carved into her frame. She read voraciously from Clara's extensive library and helped her aunt with her millinery business, learning to trim hats and serve customers. During those months, she also received 2 letters from Sonora. The first was from Mrs. Chen, the librarian, informing her that her mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Beatrice wept for days, grieving the woman who had given her life and encouraged her freedom. She also felt guilt that she had not been there, though Clara reminded her firmly that staying would have meant watching her mother die while being forced into marriage with Crowley. The second letter came from an unexpected source, the Sonora sheriff. He informed her that Winston Crowley had been arrested for fraud and assault of his mine workers, and that the contracts he had signed with her father were being investigated as potential human trafficking. Her father, facing his own legal troubles, had left Sonora and was whereabouts unknown. The news brought Beatrice a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that she would never have to face Crowley again, that justice was being served. Sadness that her father, who had once been a good man, had fallen so far. Clara counseled her to let it go, to focus on her future rather than dwelling on the past. "Some people are destroyed by hard times," Clara said. "They let their circumstances turn them bitter and cruel. Others are strengthened. You chose to be strong, Bea. Your mother would be proud." When the 2 months were up, Lucas returned to San Francisco with a deed to 40 acres near Grass Valley and a small house he had built with the help of his former boss's crew. It was simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a real stove, and a view of rolling hills that took Beatrice's breath away. "It is not much," Lucas said anxiously as they stood on the porch, "but it is ours, and I will add to it as we grow." "It is perfect," Beatrice said, meaning it. After months in her father's house, where every corner held memories of violence and fear, this simple cabin felt like paradise. They were married in April of 1884, in Clara's parlor with a justice of the peace officiating. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Clara had made for her, and Lucas wore his one good suit, brushed clean and pressed. There were no guests beyond Clara and Lucas's former boss, William Chambers, who had traveled from Sacramento to stand up for him. When Lucas kissed her at the end of the ceremony, Beatrice felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was no longer Beatrice Ellen, the frightened girl who had run into the snow. She was Beatrice Kane, wife of a good man, standing at the threshold of a new life. Their first year of marriage was hard but happy. Lucas worked long days building up their small ranch, starting with a dozen head of cattle he purchased from a neighbor and slowly expanding. Beatrice kept the house, planted a garden, and began to make friends among the other ranch wives in the area. She also started collecting books again, building a small library in their front room. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and read together, or Lucas would play the harmonica while Beatrice sewed. They talked about everything: their pasts, their hopes, their fears. They learned each other's bodies with slow tenderness, taking time to heal the wounds that Beatrice still carried from her father's violence. The passion between them grew and deepened as trust solidified. Lucas was patient and gentle, always asking what she wanted, never pushing her beyond her comfort. And gradually Beatrice discovered that intimacy could be beautiful rather than frightening, that her body was her own, and sharing it was a gift rather than an obligation. In the winter of 1885, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little terror. They were still struggling financially, and the thought of supporting a child was daunting, but they faced it together, the way they faced everything. Lucas took on extra work, hiring himself out to larger ranches during cattle drives. Beatrice sewed for neighbors, using the skills she had learned from her aunt. Slowly, they built up a small cushion of savings. Their son was born in July of 1885, a healthy baby with dark hair like his father and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Thomas after Lucas's father. Holding him for the first time, Beatrice wept, overwhelmed by love and the weight of responsibility. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, his finger gently stroking their son's tiny hand. "You are perfect. I love you so much, Bea." "I love you too," she said, "and thank you for saving me, for giving me this life." "You saved yourself," Lucas said. "I just gave you a horse and a direction. Everything else, your courage, your strength, your capacity to love after everything you endured, that is all you." As Thomas grew, the ranch prospered. Lucas's hard work and good sense paid off, and within 3 years they had tripled their cattle and hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Beatrice's garden expanded into a productive operation that supplied not only their own table but also brought in income from sales in town. She opened the bookshop she had dreamed of, a small storefront in Grass Valley where she sold new and used books and hosted a reading circle for local women. It was modest, but it was hers, a space she had created through her own effort and vision. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose born in 1888 and another son, Henry, in 1891. The house was always full of noise and laughter, so different from the cold silence of Beatrice's childhood home. Clara visited regularly, doting on her great nieces and nephews, and she and Lucas developed a warm relationship. She told Beatrice once, during a visit when Thomas was 5, that she had never seen her niece so happy. "You chose well," Clara said. "Not just in Lucas, though he is a good man. You chose yourself, chose your own freedom and happiness over what others demanded of you. That takes real courage." "I had a good example," Beatrice said, squeezing her aunt's hand. "You did the same thing when you left my father and the inheritance fight behind." "We are a family of strong women," Clara said with satisfaction. "May your daughters inherit that strength." The years passed in a blur of work and growth and simple happiness. There were hard times: a drought in 1889 that killed half their cattle, a winter illness that nearly took Rose, financial struggles that kept them awake at night worrying, but they faced everything together, Lucas and Beatrice, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Beatrice back to Sacramento to the boarding house where they had stayed during those uncertain days after their escape. Mrs. Vaughn was still there, grayer, but still running her establishment with firm efficiency. "I remember you two," she said, smiling. "Young folks in love, though you tried to pretend you were siblings. I knew better, could see it in the way you looked at each other." They laughed, no longer embarrassed by the deception. Over dinner at a nice restaurant, a luxury they could now afford, Lucas took Beatrice's hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that night in the cabin after we escaped the first snow?" "You said many things," Beatrice said, smiling. "I said I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never regretted running away into that snow. Have I kept that promise?" "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Every single day you have kept that promise. I have never regretted it, not for one moment. Running to you was the best decision I ever made." "Running to me?" Lucas said, raising an eyebrow. "I seem to remember you just running away, and I happened to be there." "No," Beatrice said seriously. "I was running to you. I just did not know it yet. Some part of me knew that night, standing in that stable, that you were exactly who I needed, and I was right." They kissed across the table, uncaring of the other diners, lost in the memory of that desperate flight through snow and the love that had blossomed from it. As they walked back to their hotel that night, under a sky full of stars, Beatrice thought about the girl she had been frightened, hurt, with no idea what her future would hold. That girl had made a choice to run rather than submit, to risk death in a snowstorm rather than surrender her autonomy. And that choice had led her here, to this life, to this man, to a happiness she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Beatrice said, "for you, for our children, for the life we built together. And I am thinking about how proud I am of that scared girl who ran into the snow. She was so brave." "She was," Lucas agreed. "She still is. I see her in you every day when you stand up for what is right, when you fight for our children's education, when you help other women in bad situations. That bravery never went away." They stood on the street corner, the city bustling around them, and Beatrice leaned into her husband's solid warmth. She thought about the snow, about the cold and fear and uncertainty. She thought about the moment she first saw Lucas in the stable, about the way he had looked at her with compassion rather than judgment. She thought about the kiss in the cabin, the proposal in Sacramento, the wedding in San Francisco. She thought about Thomas's birth, about Rose and Henry, about building a home and a life from nothing but love and determination. The past was behind her, her father's violence, Crowley's threats, the desperate flight through winter darkness. But it had shaped her, made her who she was. She would not erase it even if she could, because without it, she would never have found Lucas, never have discovered her own strength. "Let us go home," she said softly, "back to our children and our ranch and our life." "Home," Lucas agreed, and they walked together into the Sacramento night toward the future they had built with their own hands. The years continued to unfold with a rhythm that felt right. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Rose inherited her mother's love of books and her father's practical sense, a combination that served her well. Henry was the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions about the world beyond their valley. Beatrice's bookshop thrived, becoming a gathering place for the community. She hosted readings and discussions, provided books on credit to families who could not afford to pay in full, and quietly helped women who found themselves in situations similar to what she had escaped. She never spoke publicly about her own past, but somehow women in trouble found their way to her door, and she always helped them with advice, with money, with connections to people who could get them to safety. Lucas never questioned this. He understood that Beatrice's experiences had given her a mission, a purpose beyond their family. He supported her work, sometimes riding with frightened women to stage stations or providing alibis when needed. Together, they became a quiet force for good in their community. In 1895, when Thomas was 10, a man appeared at their ranch asking for Beatrice. He was elderly, worn by time and hardship, and it took her a moment to recognize him, her father. He had aged terribly in the 11 years since she had last seen him. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, his clothes shabby. He stood at their gate, hat in hand, looking uncertain and afraid. Beatrice's first instinct was to send him away, to slam the door on the man who had beaten her and tried to sell her into marriage. But Lucas, standing beside her, said quietly, "It is your choice. Whatever you decide, I support you." She looked at her father, at the broken man who had once been strong and proud, and she thought about the corrosive power of bitterness, about how carrying hatred was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. "Come in," she said finally. "We will talk." Over coffee at their kitchen table, her father told his story. After she had run, after Crowley's arrest, he had lost everything: the house, his business, his reputation. He had drifted for years, working odd jobs, drinking too much, living rough. But 6 months earlier, he had stopped drinking and started attending a Methodist church in Sacramento. He had found faith, or maybe faith had found him, and with it came the realization of what he had done to his daughter. "I do not expect forgiveness," he said, his voice shaking. "I do not deserve it. But I needed to see you, to know you were all right, to tell you that I am sorry, more sorry than I can ever express. I was a monster to you, B. I let my pride and my debts turn me into something unrecognizable, and I have regretted it every day since." Beatrice was quiet for a long time. She thought about forgiveness, about what it meant and what it cost. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. And she realized that forgiving her father was not about excusing what he had done. It was about freeing herself from the last chains of that terrible time. "I do forgive you," she said finally, "not because what you did was acceptable, it was not, but because I choose not to carry that anger anymore. I have a good life, a husband and children I love, work that fulfills me. I will not let the past poison that." Her father wept, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Thank you, B. You are a better person than I ever was." "You can meet your grandchildren," Beatrice said, "and if you are sincere about changing, if you can treat them with kindness and respect, you can visit occasionally. But if you ever raise your voice in anger in my home, if you ever lay a hand on anyone here, you will leave and never come back. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said, "and I promise. I will be the grandfather I should have been the father." He kept that promise. In the years before his death in 1899, he visited quarterly, bringing small gifts for the children and helping with ranch work when his health allowed. He never quite became close with Beatrice. The wounds were too deep for that, but they achieved a kind of peaceful coexistence. And when he died, Beatrice wept, mourning not the man he had been, but the man he might have been if circumstances had been different. The new century arrived with optimism and change. Thomas, now 15, had begun courting a neighbor girl. Rose, at 12, was already talking about becoming a teacher. Henry, at 8, announced his intention to be an explorer and discover new lands, which made both Beatrice and Lucas hide smiles. The ranch was prosperous now, one of the more successful operations in the area. Lucas had invested wisely, diversifying into horses as well as cattle, and Beatrice's bookshop had expanded to include a small lending library. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, secure in ways that both of them, given their histories, treasured deeply. On a summer evening in 1901, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and purple. The children were inside, Thomas helping Rose with her arithmetic while Henry played with the dog. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of Beatrice's roses, and crickets sang in the grass. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lucas asked, "when you came into the stable?" "All the time," Beatrice said. "How could I not? It changed everything." "I think about the snow," Lucas said, "about how cold it was, how dangerous, about how easily things could have gone wrong. We could have frozen to death in that cabin. Crowley could have caught us and killed us both. So many things could have ended badly. But they did not, Beatrice said. We made it. We survived. We built this. She gestured at the ranch, the house, the life they had created. We did, Lucas agreed. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of her knuckles, a gesture he had made thousands of times over their 17 years together. I love you, Beatrice Kane, just as much as I did that first night, maybe more. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life, Beatrice said. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me freedom, safety, love, and a future. I would walk through 1,000 snowstorms for you. Let us hope you never have to, Lucas said, smiling, but I would walk through them with you if you did. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other in desperate circumstances and built something beautiful. From the ashes of trauma, their love had been forged in snow and fear, tempered by time and trial, and it had emerged stronger than steel. Inside the house, their children laughed over something, the sound drifting through the open windows. In the barn, the horses nickered softly. The ranch hands were finishing evening chores, their voices a low rumble in the distance. Everything was peaceful, settled, right. As darkness fell and stars emerged one by one in the deepening sky, Lucas and Beatrice remained on the porch, hands clasped, watching their world sleep. They had come so far from that winter night in Sonora, from the desperation and fear that had driven Beatrice into the snow and into Lucas's life. The journey had not been easy. There had been hardships, losses, moments when they wondered if they would make it. But they had persevered together, building a life that honored both the girl who had been brave enough to run and the cowboy who had been kind enough to help her. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married his sweetheart in 1903 and took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Lucas to slow down a bit. Rose went to Teachers College in Sacramento and returned to start a school in Grass Valley, specializing in helping children from poor families. Henry did become an explorer of sorts, studying geology and working with mining operations throughout the West, though he always came home for Christmas. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and joy. Beatrice loved being a grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren in ways she never could have with her own children when money was tight. Lucas built toys for them and taught them to ride. His patience with the little ones as endless as it had been with Beatrice all those years ago. In 1910, on a crisp autumn day, Clara passed away in her sleep at the age of 78. Beatrice traveled to San Francisco for the funeral, grieving the woman who had given her refuge and wisdom when she needed it most. Clara left her townhouse to Beatrice, along with a letter. My dearest Bea, the letter read, you have been the joy of my later years. Watching you transform from a frightened, wounded girl into a strong, confident woman has been my greatest privilege. You chose love over fear, courage over comfort, and you have built a remarkable life. Your mother would be so proud. I certainly am. Live well, love deeply, and never forget that you are stronger than you know. All my love, Aunt Clara. Beatrice wept over the letter, then carefully preserved it in the family Bible. She sold the San Francisco townhouse and used the money to expand Rose's school and to create a fund for women fleeing domestic violence, a practical memorial to both Clara and her own younger self. The years blurred together in the way they do when life is good, each day distinct, but the overall pattern one of contentment and purpose. There were sorrows, of course. Friends died, crops failed occasionally, illness struck. In 1915, Henry was injured in a mining accident, breaking his leg badly, but he recovered, and the family gathered around him the way they always did when one of them needed support. Lucas's hair turned fully gray, then white. Beatrice's dark hair silvered at the temples. They moved a bit slower, needed afternoon naps, forgot things occasionally, but their love remained constant, a steady flame that had burned for over 30 years without diminishing. On their 35th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling the house and yard with laughter and music. There was dancing and food and toasts, each one celebrating the couple who had become pillars of their community. Thomas stood up, glass raised, and said, "To my parents, who taught me that real strength is not about never falling down, but about always getting back up. Who showed me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. Who built something beautiful out of nothing but determination and devotion. May we all be so lucky," Rose added, "to Mama and Papa, who taught me that courage looks like a woman running into a snowstorm to save herself, and kindness looks like a cowboy willing to help her. Thank you for showing me what a good marriage looks like." Henry, always the most emotional of their children, simply said, "I love you both. Thank you for building a home where we were always safe and always loved." Beatrice and Lucas, standing together with their arms around each other, looked out at the gathering their children and grandchildren, friends who had become family, a community they had helped build. And they knew, without needing to say it, that they had succeeded in ways that went far beyond mere survival. That night, alone in their bedroom, Lucas held Beatrice close and said, "No regrets?" "Not a single one," she said. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," he said. "Think of all the years we could have had." "We have had enough years to build a lifetime," Beatrice said, "and if God is kind, we will have many more." They did have more years, though not as many as they hoped. Lucas died in the winter of 1924, at the age of 67, of a heart attack while working in the barn. He died quickly, without pain, and when they found him, he had a smile on his face. Beatrice was devastated by the loss, but she did not break. She was 73 years old, and she had lived through too much to be destroyed by grief, as terrible as it was. She mourned deeply, honestly, but she also celebrated the 40 years they had shared, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them both. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still running her bookshop, still helping women who needed it, still telling the story when asked of the winter night in 1883 when she ran into the snow and found her future. On a spring morning in 1930, Beatrice died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79. Her family buried her next to Lucas on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read simply, "Beatrice Kane, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She chose courage." At the funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd and told the story his mother had told him many times of a young woman who refused to surrender her autonomy, who risked death rather than accept a life without choice. Of a cowboy who helped her not because he had to, but because it was right. Of a love that grew from desperate circumstances into something beautiful and enduring. "My mother used to say that running into that snow was the easiest choice she ever made," Thomas said, "because the alternative, staying, submitting, becoming something she was not, was worse than death. But the hard choice, the brave choice, was building a life afterward, not letting the trauma define her, choosing love and trust after experiencing violence and betrayal. That is where real courage lies." He looked at Lucas's grave beside his mother's, at the flowers already growing between them, and smiled through his tears. They are together now, running through the snow, riding toward dawn, building something beautiful from nothing. And they are teaching us still, showing us what it means to love fully, to choose bravely, to live well. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the story remained passed down through generations, embellished and refined, but always true in its essentials. It became a family legend, the tale of how Thomas and Rose and Henry's parents met, how a desperate flight through winter darkness became the foundation for a love that lasted 40 years and a family that grew strong and wide. The ranch continued to operate under Thomas and then his children, adapting to changing times but maintaining its roots. Rose's school educated thousands of children over the decades, many of whom would not have gotten an education otherwise. Henry's work in geology helped improve mining safety, saving countless lives. And in Grass Valley, the bookshop that Beatrice had started remained open, passed down through her granddaughter and then great-granddaughter, a quiet monument to a woman who believed in the power of stories and the importance of creating safe spaces. Years became decades, decades became a century. The world changed in ways that Beatrice and Lucas could never have imagined. But the essential truths they lived by: courage, compassion, love, and the right of every person to choose their own path remained constant, guiding lights for their descendants and for anyone who heard their story. And sometimes on winter nights, when snow falls soft and silent over the Sierra Nevada, old-timers in Grass Valley still tell the tale of Beatrice Ellen and Lucas Kane, of a woman who ran into a blizzard to save herself and a cowboy who helped her find freedom, of love born from desperation and tempered by time into something unbreakable. It is a true story, they say, every word of it. And more than that, it is a reminder that courage comes in many forms, that love can bloom in the darkest times, and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo through generations, creating ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. The snow still falls in the mountains, cold and relentless, but it no longer holds terror for the descendants of Beatrice and Lucas Kane. For them, snow is a reminder of the night that changed everything. The night two people found each other against impossible odds and built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that every person has the right to choose their own destiny, no matter the cost.